You are listening to the One Day at a Time Recovery Podcast. On this podcast, my guests share their stories of alcoholism, addiction, and how they recovered so that you can too. My hope is that you find the inspiration and resources you need to let go of what's holding you back so that you can transform into the person you were always meant to be. Ready? Here we go. Hey friend, welcome to the podcast. In case you're new here, my name is Arlina and I'm the founder of Sober Life School. I have been sober since April 23rd of 94, which means I'll be celebrating 30 years pretty soon. In that time, I have been obsessed with self-help, spirituality, psychology, and behavior change. And let's not get it twisted, I did not do it alone. In fact, I've had many helpers along the way, including mentors, sponsors, professional therapists, and lots of loving friends and family. As a way to say thank you to them, I try to be as helpful as I can and pass along what was so freely given to me. That's why I created a free guide for you with all my best tips on how to start your alcohol-free journey. It's called How to Quit Drinking, 30 Tips for Your First 30 Days. In it, you'll find strategies on how to avoid common mistakes, foods that will actually reduce your cravings, how to talk about what you're doing with your friends and family, and what to do in social situations, and so much more. So visit SoberLifeSchool.com, get your free copy, and start creating a life you love today. And just a little programming note, I recently lost my podcast editor, so this episode and future episodes will be published in the raw and unedited format. I really appreciate your patience and your continued support. Today, I'll be joined by Justin B. Long. He is a business owner of a successful veterinary practice and the author of The Righteous Rage of a 10-Year-Old Boy. It's where he shares the traumatic events in early childhood that formed his negative self-image and his journey through addiction and the process of healing that has led to finding peace. You know, after hearing Justin's story, I was reminded of just how painful childhood can be for some people. And when I hear these stories, I often feel amazed at how they survived. And the truth is, some people don't. In fact, Justin could have very easily been just another statistic. But he didn't. He survived. And not only did he survive, but he is thriving today. That is the story of hope. So without further delay, please enjoy this episode with Justin. Well, Justin, thank you so much for joining me today.
I am super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yay! I was just telling you, I love your background. Your audio sounds amazing. We're going to have a great conversation.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay. So I thought we would start with what I like to call the lightning round, which is actually very slow, but I kind of like to front load the episode with some resources. So when you first got into your recovery journey, was there any books that really helped you?
For sure. It took me 2 years to find the guy that introduced me to the book, but my mentor and sponsor took me through a workbook called A Gentle Path Through the 12 Steps by Patrick Carnes. And that was one of the most intense years of my life. And at that point, it was probably the most intense year of my life, was getting through that workbook. That book
Was it
taught me
gentle
how
or no?
to, no, well, we lovingly refer to it as the brutal path. So the brutal path is like that's took me from being completely self-absorbed and taught me how to become self-aware. And for
Wow.
me, that was a massive transition because I had zero self-awareness at that point. So yeah, that book changed my life.
Isn't that funny how we can be so self-centered and be incapable of self-examination?
Right? Yeah,
It's
it's
funny little paradox.
yeah. Story of
That's
my
okay.
life in a sentence right there.
Okay, I have actually not heard that one. There's a Women's Way Through the 12 Steps by Dr. Stephanie Covington. She's been on the podcast. That's a really interesting one. Would you say this one by Patrick It's Carnes with a K?
With a C, Carnes.
Oh, see, I can't spell. I see, I
Yeah.
shouldn't even try.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Is
He's like a PhD. I want to say he's a psychologist, psychiatrist, something like that. But he's an addiction guy.
He's an
Super
addiction guy.
guru.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's a 12-step process.
Yeah. It is. like if you took the standard 12 steps of all the 12-step programs and expanded them out into what they have the capacity to become, like that's what
Mm.
that is. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's a pretty heavy statement. Expanded it to the capacity that they can
Like it's
become.
a it takes it took me, like I said, about a year to get through
A
it. And
year.
that was, I have a workbook. I have a notebook, one of those 200-page blank notebooks that I filled up writing my answers to questions in that thing over the course of that year. But
Wow.
it goes through we taught, there was a section of it that's about family history.
Mm.
And like, we'll get into all this later, but I didn't grow up around alcohol at all. But there was a lot of mental illness in my immediate family, and there was a, addiction and abuse, trauma, stuff like that in my extended family, into my grandparents and stuff, and stuff like that that I would never ever consider a factor in my drinking.
Isn't
But
that funny?
when you list out the family tree of addiction and trauma, it's like, oh my God, like I never had a chance, like this
That's
has been an evolving just cycle of everything bad, like forever. Like I can't even tell you how far back it goes, probably to the beginning of time. But
yeah.
there's just a million aspects of that that you go through in this workbook. Would start examining behavior and belief systems and stuff like that. Like it really taught me how to know who I am and why I'm doing the things that I'm doing when most of it had been on autopilot all my life. So, like
Yeah.
that was I would say that was my starter pack for self-awareness and growth. Like everything that happened after that happened as a result of that book.
That is really, I'm going to have to get that. I'm a huge 12-step advocate. I recognize that it's not the only way, but I just keep hearing these stories over and over again for so
Yeah.
long that, yeah, that's amazing. Do you have maybe like a go-to mantra or quote that you live by? Like mine's obviously one day at a time. Like, but
Oh,
do you have like a guiding principle or anything?
I have 1,000 of them. Um,
Yeah.
one of the most important things for me, I think today isn't really a quote, but it's more just a concept of leaning into change
Mm.
and getting past fear of change. And I'm 48 years old. I got sober when I was 32, and there were some periods in the first 5 or 6 years of my sobriety that weren't very good. But I would say from the time that I was probably 38 till now, say that the last 10 years, every year of my life has been better than the year before it, and they've all been better than any of the previous years. So I've done a lot of growing and a lot of changing, and the result is that is my life keeps getting better, and a lot of it's uncomfortable. But I have learned through this that once you get through the discomfort and lean into that, that things are probably going to get better,
I
and that has
love
just really
that.
helped me embrace that idea.
Yeah, I recently heard that idea that hard choices make an easy life and easy choices make a hard life. And it's this
Oh,
idea.
I love that. I've
Isn't
never
that
heard that.
good?
That's fantastic.
Isn't that good? But that
Oh,
speaks to what you were saying. It's like we experience some discomfort, but it's like exercise, it's like painful up front, but you get a benefit later. And I find that, don't you find that like there's a price tag that comes with everything in life? And I've just come to accept that I love this idea of leaning into change and discomfort because that's in essence paying the price tag up front. It's the
hmm,
hard choices that lead to an easier life.
for sure. And I
Yeah,
think that the whole idea of staying the same is so repulsive to me. And that's something that I adopted early on in recovery is that, I don't want my life to be the same. Like, but if I want it to be
exactly.
different, I got to do different things. And that has really, really become kind of a just the way I live.
Yeah, it's very pragmatic, very, very logical. I mean, have you ever heard that idea? It's like people say it in a disparaging way. It's like, oh, but you've changed. It's like we can't be friends anymore. You've changed. And it's like, bitch, you're supposed to change.
Right? I'm going to take that as a compliment. And if you don't need to be part of my life anymore, that is okay.
That is okay. Yeah, setting boundaries is something we learn in recovery as
Yeah.
well.
I think just having enough self-value to not need to sacrifice who I am so that someone else will like me, like that's a huge change for me. And
Is
and
it?
that's something that really makes me proud of the growth that I have achieved so far.
Yeah, I mean, that is definitely an indication of growth, right? Like letting go of those people pleaser tendencies, which is so hard to do,
It
right?
is.
I just heard this guy, Dr. Michael Gervaisi, he's talking about FOPO, fear of other people's opinions. It's like,
I do love his podcast, by the way. He's amazing.
oh, do you? Isn't he
Yeah, yeah,
amazing?
yeah.
He was
Yes.
just on the Rich Roll podcast, and he's got that new book that's coming out. I forget what it's called already because it's not on Audible yet. But yeah, he's amazing. Master of
Yeah,
Change. Is that what his podcast is called?
yeah,
Something like
yeah.
that. Yeah. Awesome. I love that leaning into change and discomfort. That is very mature of you.
Well, thank you, thank you.
That's very wise. Do you have a regular self-care practice, whether it's like a morning routine or a weekly schedule? What does that look like for you?
Definitely. Well, that's another thing that I've learned about myself in recovery is that I am a routine person, and I'm like that. Oh my goodness, what's the hungry, angry, lonely, tired, the HALT
Alt.
inventory?
Yeah.
Like that really taught me a lot about myself. It's like stupid, obvious things. I should have known my entire life that when my blood sugar gets low, I turn into the Incredible Hulk, right? Like, but I didn't. I never put two and two together that I'm hungry and I'm also a giant asshole right now. Like I never put those two together. So I've learned that about myself that I'm
Connecting the
and
dots is
right,
important.
I'm very food dependent. But but yeah, and I'm very exercise dependent too. I've
Are
learned
you?
that when I go to the gym and work out every morning, like that boosts my mood from a 4 to an 8 right off the bat. And if I
Isn't that
don't,
amazing?
I really can't get past a 4 all day long. And that's a bad place for me to be. So exercise in the morning is huge for me. And then follow that with a solid breakfast because food is huge for me.
Okay.
And the one addiction that I have not really tried to overcome yet in my life is caffeine. So I got to have my cup of coffee every
I'm
morning.
with you. I have no shame
Uh,
about that.
yeah. So, but
I've
I
given up
like,
every other damn thing. I am not giving
right.
up my
I'm hanging
caffeine.
on to the coffee.
Yeah.
Plus, I've made probably a terrible mistake and started roasting my own coffee beans, which turned me
You
into this
did.
massive coffee snob. And like, so, which makes it hard to travel because the coffee everywhere else is just
Just
inadequate,
crap.
you know?
Yeah. I hear you.
But so, yeah, I go to the gym, I eat a good solid breakfast, have my coffee. Taking a shower in the morning really gets my brain turned on, lets me know it's time to go to work. And
Okay.
those are the things that I do every day, Monday through Friday. And I don't go to the gym on the weekends. Saturday and Sunday is body recovery week or time.
Smart.
But I'm still physically active throughout the day. But
Hmm.
those things are my foundation for a quality day, positive interactions with other people. You know, I own a business. My wife and I own a veterinary practice, so I'm interacting with staff and clients throughout the day,
And
and
horses.
horses. Yes, so I've
Big
got to be
animals.
able to deal with conflict. I've got to be able to deal
Oh.
with people who are having the worst day of their life, because that
Oh.
happens all the time. And in order for me to do that, I need to be on my A game. And the way I do that is my morning routine.
I didn't really think about that when we were talking earlier that you're dealing with people that are going through the worst day of their lives, like so your clients are I don't like to say owners, but like custodians of horses. Is
Yeah.
that fair?
Yeah,
Because
I think that's
anyway,
reasonable.
whatever,
Yep.
you own a horse. But they're taking care of these beings and they come to you because something's not going right.
Yeah. I
So
mean, a lot of our stuff is regular preventative vaccines and dental care and stuff like that. But horses are stupid accident prone. They get hurt all the time.
they do.
But they also like their intestinal tract is just a nightmare design. Kind of
Hmm.
like it makes you question the idea of intelligent design or
Like, how did that happen?
divine anything because the design of the horse physique is terrible.
It's terrible.
It is.
Yeah.
So they're prone to a lot of challenges, but
Oh,
so we
so when
deal with a
people
lot of horse
coming to you.
emergencies.
Yeah. Oh, the emergencies, like putting
Yeah,
horses down or dealing with people that are scared and sad and
right. Yeah.
you looking for
And
someone to blame, possibly.
right. And I
Yeah.
need to, I'm not the face of it. My wife is the doctor, but I'm still there and I'm a representative of the medical community and hopefully part of the team that's going to help save the day, right?
Right.
But if I'm an emotionally volatile, highly sensitive, just super over the top about everything because that's who I am when I'm drinking. Like I can't be in that situation. I'm going to make it worse. So there's no way I could make it better. Right. And
Yeah.
even me, um, unself-aware and just reacting to other people lashing out because of the pain that they're in that moment, which really has nothing to do with me. But if
Right.
I don't have the awareness of that, then I'm going to take things personally and defend my honor and fight back. And like, it's going to be a nightmare for everybody. Right. Like all
Yeah.
that
No,
has to
that's
do
really wise.
with this. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. Where are you on the sort of spiritual spectrum? Is that included in part of your
I'm
morning
sure
routine?
there's a corner somewhere on that spectrum. I'm in that corner.
Okay, this
I've
is
gone through
good.
a lot of different places on that spectrum, I think, in the course of my life. My mom was hyper super like over the top religious, which was
Mm,
part of her sickness and the way she was trying to deal with life.
which is a huge
But
turnoff for you
right,
personally.
that really drove me away from organized religion.
Yeah.
Um, but I do I am a fan of meditation. I did a
Yeah.
lot of meditation in earlier parts of recovery. Roland, my mentor that took me through that workbook by Patrick Carnes, also was also a meditation guru, which is what really drew me to him in the beginning. And so I have spent a lot of time sitting on the pillow,
Mhm.
trying not to pay attention to all the thoughts racing through my head, and
Yeah, that's a
varying
challenge.
levels of success and failure on that. But
Yeah,
and
but as a
I go,
practice, yeah.
yeah, I go in and out with that. Um, I when I started swimming laps, which I don't have access to that pool anymore because I moved, but I had the YMCA pool to myself every morning at 5:30. And
Wow.
I found that that was like the super meditation spot because I've got my goggles on. I'm looking at the bottom of the pool. I can't hear anything. I'm counting my breaths and my strokes, so I'm just focused on breathing. And when I see the black line, I do a flip turn, and then I just focus on breathing every fourth stroke, counting my strokes. And like that really put me in a great Zen spot, doing that for 30 minutes. And like that's the best meditative practice I've ever had was swimming laps, and I miss it.
Oh,
I
sounds
haven't found a good replacement for that.
yeah, that's beautiful. I love that that you found like another way to do meditation because I think a lot of people struggle with it.
Hmm.
And yeah, so finding something that works for you, it's
Right.
beautiful. Yeah, that's awesome. Um, what is one thing you wish you knew when you first got sober?
Ooh, just one.
Well,
Everything that I
what
know
comes up
now.
for you?
Um, I wish that I knew that I can change the way that I feel about myself. I did not know that for years into sobriety. Um, but I did not know that with the help of trauma therapy, I went through EMDR,
Oh, you're
trauma
the
therapy.
yeah, second person in a row.
Yeah. And that helped me change everything about my life. That process helped me change the way that I feel about myself now and the way that I feel about 25-year-old Justin, who was an insane drunk maniac. That helped me
Yeah.
change the way I feel about 10-year-old Justin and 5-year-old Justin, which I had a very negative self-view all my life. By the time I got sober, I hated myself so bad I didn't really care if I lived or died.
Oh,
And taking alcohol out of the mix changed that for about the first 3 or 4 months. But then the pink cloud wears away, and I was still me, and I still hated myself, and
mm,
I carried that around in sobriety for years. My life got better, but I still, the way that I felt about myself didn't change. And had I known then what I know now, I would have sought out therapy a lot sooner, I think.
mm. That's really good to know. I think, people start out, listen, people start out in all different ways, but yeah, I'm a huge fan of therapy. I did EMDR as well, and it was hugely productive.
Yes, that
Yeah,
changed. Like that's the center of everything in my life at this point because that's like that's kind of the delineating line between old Justin and new Justin is going through that process. Like it's unbelievable how profoundly that impacted me.
yeah, it's so interesting because we're all walking around with this trauma, but to varying degrees, to be fair.
Hmm.
And but we also have this mechanism of dissociation, like we detach from it so that we can survive. But it's like
Right.
walking around with an anchor around your neck and you don't even know it. because you're so
Right.
accustomed to it. So I just want to commend you for being so brave and doing that EMDR therapy because that is not easy.
It's not.
That's a hard choice.
Yes, but that's one of those things that taught me that, doing the hard thing can really bring some awesome results.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about how we got here. You know, the title of your book, I should have put my glasses on. The Righteous Rage of a 10-Year-Old Boy, A Journey of Self-Discovery. How long did it take you to write this book?
I spent right at a year writing that. Um, and really, it didn't start out as a book. It started out as a journal because, and that is the story of me going through trauma therapy. It was
Okay.
kind of a fly on the wall experience of what the sessions were like and what I did and what was going on in my head. Um, and I learned so much so fast going through that I was afraid I was going to lose it. I'm getting a little
Yeah.
older. The memory's not quite as good as it used to be. So,
Reach into the choir.
so I would come home from therapy and just try to journal out everything that happened and what we talked about and what my big insights were and what I managed to change that day. And by the time I got through 3 or 4 months of doing that, I was like, the insecurities that I have are the same as the insecurities that everybody else has. The traumas that I
Yeah.
experienced that formed them are my own, but like we all have the same insecurities, and like I can change. Like I can stop being driven by those insecurities, and everybody needs to know about that. Like if I can change, anybody can change. So like that's when I decided that it's not just going to be a journal, it's going to be a book.
That is so beautiful. Okay, now I can't, like I was telling you before, I was like, I get so many books, I don't get to read them all before I interview people, but definitely. Do you have an audiobook version of this?
No,
Will you
not
tell
yet.
me
I
when
don't
you
know if I'm
do?
going to.
Oh, please do.
Well,
Please do.
well, I'm working on the third audiobook. I have another book series called The Adventures of the Horse Doctor's Husband, which are
Oh,
all like
that's
real life
right.
horse emergencies.
Yeah.
And I'm narrating the third one of those, and it's such a process. Reading is not too bad, but editing all that stuff and get it to where Audible will accept it, it's just so
Oh,
time
yeah.
consuming. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh,
You might have to
I don't
pay
know.
somebody because it sounds
Every
like a
time I do
worthy.
it, I'm like, I'm never doing this again.
And here I am. I'm like, please do an audible.
Right, right.
For those of us with ADHD, the audible man, it's been those books have been a godsend.
Yes, it'll get
Okay.
there.
Okay. And you have to do it yourself because it's different when somebody else reads it. It's just not the same.
It is, especially when it's that personal of a story, you
I
know?
know, right? Oh my goodness. Well, let's talk a little bit. I'm always curious about family of origin because I feel like that sets the stage for everything else. So,
Hmm.
what would you, well, I was going to say, what would you like to share about your family? But I guess you put it all out there. So let's get into it. Let's.
Let's do it.
So, what was your relationship like with your parents?
Challenged and challenging, I think, right from the get-go. And a lot of this I know in retrospect. So I know that my mom and dad went to college together, and my mom was pretty book smart. My dad was not. So my mom always said that she got 2 degrees because she did all my dad's homework so that he could graduate college too. But so they
Bless
did
her
that.
heart.
Yep. And at the end of college, my mom, I don't know all the details, of course, but my mom decided to take off with another guy that they had partied with through college and went to California with this other dude and left my dad hanging. Well, he wasn't my dad. The guy that she went to California with is my dad, and apparently he was a raging alcoholic, and they had their little 2 year soiree out there, and he would beat the crap out of her, and she was the one with the job, so she would go to work and leave me with him, and he would take me to the bar and leave me in my little kid carrier sitting on the bar and forget about me, and she would come home from work and have to go to all the bars that he went to and try to figure out where I was at,
Oh my
stuff like
God.
that. And then, so once she got tired of that, she went back to the college boyfriend and needed to be rescued, and he
Mm.
rescued her. But now she's got a kid that belongs to somebody else. So I think I started off at a disadvantage just because I was a constant reminder of that. Like, and I try to imagine myself in that position, and like that's a lot to take on, right? So I can find some empathy for my dad in that regard. But especially, fast forward 6 years and my little sister was born, who is his kid. And that's when things really changed. And so, my dad was extremely strict. He was very, very much a workaholic. He had a lot of trauma from his childhood. That's another thing that I know in retrospect, that his dad was very hard on him. But he didn't turn to alcohol or drugs or a lot of the compulsive behaviors that we tend to turn to, but he turned to work. And and he believed if you're not sleeping, you ought to be working, and you probably shouldn't be sleeping. So he would go to work all day long, and he would come home and work on the house or work on the car. Or, he always had 15 projects going on that needed to be done. And I was expected to be a big part of that. So I had my big chores list that I had to do every day. And and like, you don't go to bed until everything's done. And like I said, my mom, super religious, trying, she had a challenged childhood because her mom wanted the perfect daughter to show off to her friends at the sewing circle and all the stuff. And my mom had scoliosis, her back was twisted up, and she was not the perfect daughter, but her little sister was. And so her mom rejected her, kind of cast her aside in favor of her sister. So my mom, had that she was carrying around all of her life, that she was trying to find acceptance and love and a place to be plugged in. So, she kept thinking that if she does all the right stuff and gets God's attention, that he will solve her problems. And and her life consisted of just that search, like that this church, we're going to try this church for a while and this preacher, and when that doesn't work, we're going to say that that was all wrong and try something else. And so she became a serial churchgoer, trying to find a way to get
The
God's
right
attention.
church.
Right. Never happened. So,
Mm.
but the way, here, I'll give you some examples from my childhood of my relationship with my parents. So my dad, one of the things that was my job was splitting firewood and stacking firewood, because we heated our house with a wood stove. So I would come home from school in the wintertime and split firewood, and we had this big rack that I had to stack it in, and the firewood had to go all the way to the top of the rack and had to be perfectly flat across the top. And when you stand on the side and look down the line, there can't be any pieces sticking out. Everything had to be perfect. And my dad would come home from work, and we would go out and inspect the firewood stack, and he would make me count all the pieces that are sticking out that I needed to get swats for. And then I would get a spanking. And then we would go to my next task and inspect that, and I would get a spanking for whatever I had done wrong on that. But like every day, I would have all this work to do. I'd come home and work my ass off to get all the stuff done. And then my dad would come home and punish me for everything. And like, that's starting at 5, 6, 7 years old. That's my everyday life. And my mom was not a disciplinarian at all. And so when I would get out of control, running around like kids do and being loud and all the things, she would have me pulled in the big trash can from the alley and pull the trash bags out of it and sit inside there until my dad got home. Which you know, so like these are my two primary caregivers. So I can't rely on, I don't have any trust in either one, right? Because one's throwing me
Right.
the way and the other one's beating me to death. So um so I didn't really have a safe place. I didn't have anybody to be my comforter or to rely on. And so I always felt at odds. As far back as I can remember, I was at odds with my parents, and I didn't feel like part of the family, and I didn't want to be
Mm.
part of the family. Like my whole world was escapism. Like right as far back as we didn't have a television, but I was reading at like 5, and I found that books are the way to escape. Like I can get into Encyclopedia Brown or the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew, and like go be in their world where kids are celebrated and appreciated. And like it's okay for the kid to be smart, and like the adults
Yeah.
appreciate what they bring to the table. They have value. Like that's the world I wanted to be in. So I became a bookaholic when I was in my single digit years, and that got me out of my world as much as I could get out of it for years until I discovered alcohol in high school.
Were there any teachers or anybody outside of your immediate family that was aware that you were being abused in that way?
Not to that level, I don't think. I didn't talk about it to anybody. I knew my dad was stricter than my friends' dads, but I didn't acknowledge that I was ever abused until I was probably 45 years old in therapy. So, like
Because you thought that was normal?
I knew it wasn't normal, but one of the things that my parents impressed upon me very early on when I was really young was that you don't ever question your parents, that they are always right, and that
Wow.
to question mom and dad is to question God. And they, pull the little verses out of the Bible about, spare the rod and spoil the child, and that the father's the head of the household and he's the representative of God and all this stuff. So like, even if it wasn't conscious, like I had this belief that my parents were infallible and I could not question their decisions and how they did anything. And so I didn't.
And so how did that how did that make you feel about yourself? Like you were experiencing a lot of pain. So it seems like the only reasonable conclusion you could come to was that there was something wrong with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was the obvious conclusion. And I remember arguing with my therapist about this because I would kind of defend my belief that the reason I ended up in the trash can was because of me.
Mm,
And I believed that because I knew what the consequences were to my actions, and I would forget that, or I would be wound up about something and not have control of myself. If I could just kept my mouth shut, or like not try to engage my mom in whatever game I'm playing in my head, that I wouldn't be in the trash can right now. So I got myself in here, even though I believed that the system was messed up, but I knew what the system was. I knew the rules, and I would still wind up getting myself in trouble because I didn't have any self control.
oh
So,
my God.
um, but I think also at that age, obviously your brain's not done developing. You don't even have all the prefrontal cortex stuff yet for reasoning things out. So I couldn't see the bigger picture that
Yeah.
um that my parents were bad parents. Like I couldn't process that side of things. But but the self beliefs that I formed from all those things, from my dad, I believed that no matter how hard I try, I'm going to fall short of the mark. It's never going to be good enough.
And you're going
And
to get
that
punished for it.
right. Like all I wanted in the whole world was that pat on the back to say I did a good job. Like that carrot was always dangled in front of me and I could never get to it. And I chased that carrot all the way into adulthood and like never stopped chasing it. Like that, those kinds of insecurities, I think, really dictated my whole experience as an adult because,
Absolutely.
my escape from home was to go join the army, and the army is filled with people in charge of you who punish you for everything because that's what the army does. So just reinforced all of those beliefs, right?
Okay.
And then as I got out into the working world, I resented everybody that had any kind of authority over me. So like everything, I was hypersensitive to any kind of criticism, and
Mhm.
I just couldn't take any kind of criticism. And as soon as I didn't get the pat on the back from my supervisor, I resented him. I hated him. Like it became an antagonistic relationship. So, but I was also super competitive. I have to outperform everybody else because I'm trying to get that pat on the back, right? I'm trying to get that
Yeah.
approval and that acceptance. And so, like, I was a horrible employee, but I was a horrible teammate. I was a horrible partner in a relationship. I wasn't a good friend, all because of those insecurities from the beliefs that I formed about myself when I was a little kid.
Yeah. And we're all walking around with all this and we don't even know it.
Right. Yeah, it's not just
Yeah.
me.
No, no, but that sounds really painful. How old were you when you started experimenting with alcohol or drugs or whatever?
I was 13 the first time I got drunk. And it was a wonderful experience. And I had planned it out for a little while. My parents got into historical reenactment. I'm sure you've heard of like Civil War reenactors and stuff, right? My
Yeah.
parents, they didn't do that one. There's another one where they do like rendezvous where they have like Indians and mountain men set up, these pre-1840 rendezvous, and everybody goes out and camps out in
What
teepees
is
and
the
all this
deal with
stuff.
that?
It's
That's,
it's its own world.
it's a whole
So,
thing. Yeah, let's
but
not
one of
judge,
the
but that's weird.
yeah, yeah. But one of the things about that was like on Saturday night when you go to one of these things, like they have a big bonfire and everybody brings their chairs out and sits in a big circle around it, and they play guitars and pass the moonshine jugs around the circle. And and so like I was part of that for several years before I decided that next time I'm gonna start taking a sip out of one of those jugs before I pass it on to the next person. And Like I picked my night. My parents went to bed early that night, and I sat out there and I took a little sip out of the first one and passed it on, and took a little sip out of the second one and passed it on. Like it was great. Like I'm having a good. Nobody said anything. Like none of the adults were, yelling at me or anything. I was like, oh man, this is great.
It felt
And
amazing.
oh man, like so I got annihilated. And eventually somebody went and got my dad because apparently I stopped passing the jugs. And so I had like 5 or 6 jugs stacked around my feet and all these bottles all around and everything. Like I was just hoarding them. So if I'd kept passing them, I probably would have got away even farther.
Oh my
But
goodness.
no, like, but my dad, I lived in terror of my dad. And, and he came over and picked me up by the ear, which is his favorite control mechanism, and drug me off. And I just could not stop laughing at him. Like I had
You were
no fear
feeling
of
no
my dad.
pain.
Right. And I just, I think I felt a little safer despising him a little more openly, because I was drunk.
Hmm.
And that was a liberating feeling. Like
Yeah.
I liked standing in front of my dad in a end of the world confrontation and not being afraid of him. So like that was my initial
Oh,
connection to alcohol. And it was a couple of
yeah.
years before I ever got to drink again. But by the time I was 17, I was drinking every weekend with friends in high school. I lived in Wyoming. I could buy at 3 or 4 different bars out there, and so I was the alcohol supplier, and we partied. And like again, that was a connection with people who accepted me for who I was, and I
Yeah.
felt plugged in and loved and accepted. And alcohol was a big part of that. And so again, like that's how I formed all my beliefs about how alcohol is like that's where it's at for me. Like that's my ticket to feeling good about who I am. And
Yeah.
like in the beginning, it worked great. It was a wonderful tool. But like as we all know, it has diminishing returns, and at some point, the price that you pay is not worth any kind of gain that you get on it.
Yeah. So it sounds like 17 was a good year for you. And then you graduate. And then did you graduate high school and immediately go into the military?
I went to the military before I graduated high school. I
Oh,
was
you
I was so ready
did.
to get out of home.
Yeah,
Uh,
you needed to
like,
go.
yeah,
Was
I don't
he
know if they
still
still
beating
have it.
you? Was he still
No,
beating you?
that stopped when I was about 13, but then it was just verbal confrontation. Like everything that we did was a fight. We would go out to we moved from Oklahoma to Wyoming to a big cattle ranch out there, and we were like the wintertime caretakers, and so we would
Mm.
do a lot of working on fence and trying to get the corrals ready for when the cattle show up next
In the
spring and all this stuff.
winter.
Oh yeah, that's
Brutal,
the only time
dude.
to do it.
That's
So,
brutal.
so I had to work with him all the time, but it was always a fight. He hated me, I hated him. Like it was just constantly butting heads on everything that we did. But he still controlled me, like 1,000% controlled me. And even though I rebelled and fought against him constantly, I never expected to win, right? Like I knew that no matter what, he's going to win this. And like that was just, I fought anyway, just to,
Yeah.
try to show that, I don't know what
You
I
weren't
was
going to
trying
make
to
it
show.
easy for him.
Right, right. I'm not going to roll over. Like you're going to earn every inch of this.
Fuck that guy. Okay, I feel you. So team Justin. Yeah. Okay, so you go into the military. Is that when the
Oh,
consequences?
that's where I was going. I forgot about that. So yeah, the National Guard back then, this is in the early 90s. They had a program called the split option entry where I went to basic training the summer between my junior year and my senior year of high school. And then
Oh,
I came back
wow.
and finished high school, and I went to drill with the National Guard unit there once a weekend or one weekend a month. And
Yeah,
then when I graduated high school, then I went off and finished doing all the stuff. So
right.
I was like, as soon as I found out that that existed, I was in. I was like, this is my ticket
Yeah.
out of town. This is a guaranteed escape, and I can go anywhere in the world, and I'm going. And I
Oof.
did.
Yeah. How long were you in the military?
Oh, 3 years. I
Uh,
learned by the time I was probably 6 months into it, I realized I made a horrible mistake. But it's like
just
I
more of
thought I
the
was
same.
right. I was trying to get away from my dad, and turns out there's 50 million people just like my dad in the army. It's like, oh my God. Like, so
It's the same.
yeah, I used to tell people that I I thought I had a problem with my dad, and it turns out I have a problem with authority.
Oh, oh, that thing. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness. So let's fast forward to when you get sober. Like, what was it? Did you have like a turning point, a moment of clarity? Like, obviously, like things didn't go well.
right.
Like, what
Yeah,
happened?
I went through, I got sober when I was 32. And I got into a relationship. I finally found a woman at a bar that was willing to have sex with me. And so I moved in with her that same day. And yeah, that's how that works,
Good for
right?
you. Yeah.
Let's say alcoholics and lesbians, like instant relationship.
Instant really.
I don't know.
Yeah. What do you do on your second date? What's the second date?
Yeah, move in. Right.
Yeah, I bring a movie.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I did. So, um, but I spent 11 years in that relationship, which I could say was a one night stand that lasted for 11 years. But
Just one night repeated for 11 years.
yeah, yeah, Groundhog Day. But
Yeah.
I was so desperate for attention and approval. Like I didn't know how to accept it once I got it. All I knew how to do was search, right? Because that's what I'd
Right.
done my entire life was want to be somewhere else, want to feel something else, want to be somebody else. And so I got into a relationship that should have solved all my problems. And next thing I know, like every time I get drunk and we're like at a bar or we're partying with friends, like I'm hitting on every woman in the room. Still, I didn't understand that I was seeking that acceptance. I thought I was a
Mm.
sex addict or, I didn't know. I was just being,
Something was
just
amiss.
reacting to my urges and my instincts, right? But I know now that that was me just like for me, sexual attention from a woman is like the ultimate form of acceptance. And
Wow.
that's what I wanted. And so like that every time I was drinking around other people, that's what I was after. And then the next morning, I would be horrified about what I had done, how I behaved last night, and shame would just eat my lunch. And so 10 years of that, like every day when I wake up, whether I saw anybody last night or not, I'm filled with shame for the first 3 hours of the day.
Oh my
And then
God.
I can't wait to come home and get drunk so I can stop feeling like shit about myself. And like that was every day, every day, every day, just shame, drinking, creating more shame, drinking, creating more shame, drinking. And like by the time I was 32, like I didn't have a rock bottom event. I didn't have some big giant explosion. I was just like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like I
Just
don't want to live
can't.
anymore. Like I can't imagine how my life could be any different. So I just don't want to participate anymore. And
Oh,
but
yeah.
I worked with a guy. Um he was really cool. He was super funny. Everybody liked him. And somehow we hit it off and we're pretty good friends. And so like the fact that he accepted me means that his opinion on things carries a lot of weight, right?
Yeah.
And so I would sit with him in the morning behind the shop, and we would smoke cigarettes and kind of sweat out our hangovers, and talk about trying to get our drinking under control. And it was always in a joking way, like we were never quite willing to say I have a drinking problem, but we're like, man, it's a little bit of blood in my dry heaving this morning. I probably need to take a couple of days off and give my liver a break and all this. But
Yeah.
one day, I had heard a comedian somewhere say something about going to a meeting, and I didn't understand the line. I didn't even know what a meeting was. I was vaguely aware that AA exists, and that's about it.
Mhm.
But I decided to use that joke because I always wanted to make Todd laugh, and so I was like, yeah, yeah. It's like this is getting rough. Like I'm not quite ready to go to a meeting, but I got to do something. And he had a moment of seriousness. He's like, I've been thinking about going to a meeting, man. And I was like, whoa, like if it's okay for him to do it, it's okay for me to do it. Like that was the permission slip that I needed to do something different.
Wow.
And I went home that day from work and I drank my last 3 beers while I read through the AA website. I
Hmm.
found out there was a meeting at a church like 2 blocks from my house. And I was like, that's serendipitous, but it wasn't for like 3 more days. That was a Monday, and the meeting wasn't until a Thursday.
Oof.
So I drank those 3 beers on that Monday, and I was like, I'm gonna not drink until Thursday. I'm gonna go to this meeting and see what that's about, and if they've got some solutions or ideas on how I can kind of wrestle this thing under control. Like stopping drinking, I never even thought about that as an option, but I was looking for a way to cut it
Management.
down and
Yeah.
to feel
Cut
better
down.
about who I am when I do all this stuff, right? Get rid of
Yeah.
the shame. That's what I really wanted is how do I
Yeah.
not get my ass kicked by the shame monster every day.
Yeah.
So, but I went to that meeting, and like that was a chapter change in my life right there, because for the first time ever, they did a first step meeting for me, and all these people, there's like 20 of them in there, and they sat around and took turns talking about how they felt about themselves when they were drinking, and how a lot of them didn't like who they were, and I have never in my life heard anybody talk about, especially a man, talk about feelings before. Like, I was in
Wow.
such a toxic masculine environment around the military all my life up until
Oh,
that
yeah.
point. Every guy there is, trying to convince everybody that he's the toughest guy in the room. And that's just like, and I was too. And I was not a tough guy, but I was wearing that mask, trying to fit in with everybody else and comparing the way that I feel to the way everybody else looks. And so when I got to this meeting and they were talking about feelings and like hating themselves, I was like, holy shit, like these people understand me. Like, I've never felt understood the way that I did at that meeting. And
Oh my
and I was
God.
in, like I was immediately 100% in. I just wanted to get more of that.
That is amazing. I mean, I want to cry. I remember having that same feeling of like hearing people say out loud the things that I felt secretly, privately, and just being so leveled, just being
Mm,
leveled by that, and the amount of compassion and empathy that they had was, yeah, rock my world, rock
yeah,
my world too.
absolutely.
Yeah, I had somebody say, "Welcome home." And I knew it in my bones that I was home. Like, these are my people. They get my kind of crazy. And I'm going to find a new normal here because I ain't normal anywhere else.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah, that's beautiful. And is that when your friend took you through the Patrick Carnes book? Or did you
I
try to do it like the traditional 12-step way?
I did the traditional stuff for the first 2 years.
Okay.
I didn't meet Roland until I was a little over 2 years sober.
Hmm.
And those there were a lot of ups and downs during that time, but
Oh,
like I
yeah.
was saying
That's a
earlier,
roller
just
coaster.
yeah, like the pink cloud for me was fantastic. I
Yeah.
loved that. But once I got past that point, and I worked the 12 steps, I was diligent about all this stuff. I made my list and all the things, my inventory. Excuse me.
Did you have to make
But
amends to your dad?
my dad was already dead at that point. He died while I was still drinking.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
but I worked on trying to or repair some of the damage with my mom.
Okay.
Um, that was an ongoing thing all the way until she died, which never really had complete fruition. But I made efforts. Um,
You feel good about
but
what you were able to do.
yeah,
That's a
yeah,
participation thing. Like, I have a family member, it's a participation thing. And if they don't participate, then you just have to like get to a place of peace with where you're at.
that's all you can do, right?
That's all you can do.
Yeah, but I did that for 2 years, and by the end of that 2 years, I I knew that something had to change again, because I was back in that
Mm.
place of, I'm sober. I don't have my coping tools for any of the things anymore. I still had cigarettes. I was still smoking at that point. I smoked for another year after that, but alcohol was and cigarettes were my two coping tools for everything in the world, because those two things could help me change the way that I feel right now, no matter what
Hmm.
situation I'm in, right? If
Hmm.
I'm excited, I smoke a cigarette. It calms me down. If I'm angry, I smoke a cigarette. If I'm bored, I smoke a cigarette. No matter what, like, I was never comfortable with how I feel, and a cigarette or a drink would change that for me. And so I had given up the drink, and that was the real big one.
Hmm.
And I was back to being in a negative headspace all the time. Like, and part of it was that I was in a relationship with that woman. The first year and a half of sobriety, we stayed together, even though when I quit drinking, she did not. She doubled down.
Oh,
Um,
brutal.
Yeah, so I had that. I had very unhappy relationship at home. I hated my job, mainly because the guy that I worked for was also riddled with insecurities, and so he was so much like my dad that he had to control everybody that worked for him to the nth degree, all day, every day, and just constantly remind him that he's in charge. I'm in charge. I'm in charge. I'm in charge. You have to do what I say. And because I hadn't dealt with any of my insecurities, I rebelled against that so hard and I just fought with him constantly. And so I hated everything about my life. Like my home life sucked, my job sucked. Like I didn't have any place to be. I didn't have a safe place in the world.
Mm,
And I didn't know what to change. Like I took out the alcohol. That was supposed to solve all my problems. I still have all my problems. And,
yeah.
uh, and I went to a speaker meeting one night. And like at that point, I was going to meetings like 6, 7 days a week, all
Did
the
the
way
ma
like through
did
two
the
years of
meetings
sobriety.
did the meetings make you feel better? Because like you were talking about cigarettes are a coping skill, but there's like prayer, meditation, service that usually comes within the were those were not giving you any relief.
They were like being at the meeting was great because that was the one place that I could be plugged in for an hour to my people, right?
Hmm.
But in the middle of the workday, like that seemed like that was on another
Oh,
continent. It was so far away, and like I would try to like I would text other people and like try to share little positive tidbits with them because that made me feel good for a minute, but
yeah.
wasn't supposed to have a cell phone at work, so like I would have to do that on the sly, and just trying to be plugged into that was so difficult at that time. Like cell phones weren't what they are now. Obviously, that
Right,
was
yeah.
2008, 2009,
It was a
but
minute.
right. But I went to a speaker meeting and this guy, I didn't know who he was, but he was an old gay one-eyed Apache Vietnam veteran yoga instructor. So like he's got long black hair, he's got this glass eye that's kind of staring off into the distance, like you're not it's not even
You don't know
remotely
where he's
close where
looking?
the other
Yeah.
one's looking. Yeah. And and he sounded just like George Takei when his voice, like it
Oh,
just had that deep, like tremulous, like wow, he had so much presence. And and like he stood up there and talked shit about AA for a while, and was like calling out the old timers in the room. These are the guys that I know. Was calling them out for 13th step and stuff. And
oh,
like
good for him.
the first 15 minutes of that were so fucking uncomfortable. I was like, oh my God, what is happening
Yeah.
right now?
That's
And then
wild.
he's like, all right, now I'm going to get on with my thing. And then he told a little bit of his story. But mostly he talked about meditation and the power of getting still.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this is my guy. Like everything that just happened, like that's what I want. And so I sought him out. Turns out he only lived like 3 blocks from me too. And
Wow.
I'd driven past his house 100 million times, never knew he was there. But I spent the
Wow.
next I think 5 years working with him. We went through that workbook. We did a lot of meditation. He taught me
Mm.
how to self-examine and how to disconnect from my parents in a way that I really needed to.
Oh.
Um, I had this sense of familial obligation, like as the guy that was making money out of anybody in my family. I was still sending money home to my parents to help them get through crisis after crisis after crisis. And he taught me that the only person that can obligate me to my family is me, and that I have the power to unobligate myself at any moment. And I did that. Like I cut off the flow of money to my parents. I stopped talking to them, and found that removed a big negative drain off of me.
Yeah.
And and then we started examining all the beliefs that I inherited from my parents.
Oh my
And
God, that's everything.
like that was so stunning to me. Like I have all these things like political beliefs and all the religious stuff, but like everything that I believe about everything, I learned from my parents, right?
Yeah.
Um, I remember one of the early things that happened for me that really put a crack in that armor um, was a steak. And I didn't get steak very often when I was a kid. We didn't really ever have any money, but when we did, my dad, like his mantra was, a good steak ought to be burned to a crisp. And so that was the thing I believed. Like when you have a steak, you burn it to a crisp, and that's how it's good. And
Ew.
like I got forced into eating a medium rare steak at a steakhouse. I think I was probably like 35 when this happened. And like I was so against the idea. Like, oh, I mean, there's it's bleeding, right? It's still pink on the inside. And then I took a bite of it and it was amazing. I was like, holy crap, like that's awesome. It's like my dad was so wrong about that. And that like that was a crack in the ice, right? And then after that, that's
Wow.
what else is my dad wrong about? And turned out my dad
A
was wrong
great
about a
many
lot.
things.
Yeah. And to include who I am and my value as a human being,
Wow.
Like so we started at the little stuff like the steak and we went to the other end on like self-beliefs and self-love. And it didn't get me where I have ended up now, but it got me going that direction. The other thing
Yeah.
Roland did was spend a lot of time helping me get past a lot of biases that I had. Um, One of those being against therapy. The idea that a man can go to a therapist and talk about his feelings. Like I still had this notion in my head that I had to put on the false front to look tough for everybody, and that I could never let anybody see past that. Even though everybody saw past it, the only one I was fooling was me. But he really just beat on that shield until I finally dropped it, and I hate that it took me so long, but he's the reason that I finally went to my first therapist, and that was a great experience. That like one, I think that was my last big thing. Like once I got over that hump and became willing to go see a therapist, like I dropped all my reservations and became willing to do anything that I need to do to improve myself. And like that's when I really got super committed to constant self-improvement, constant growth, and just continuous evolution and never stagnating. And I think that mindset is what allows me to get through the hard times in life, because I know that all things are temporary, and if I keep doing what I'm doing, no matter what, like I'm going to be better tomorrow than I am today. I'm going to be better next year than I am right now. And I've had success after success after success since I put away the idea that I can't let other people see who I am.
Yeah. That's a big one. What was it? What was EMDR therapy like? What was the process like for you?
Um, it was tough. I
It
will
was
say
hard. Yeah.
it was hard. I I didn't do that right away. I went to therapy for about a year, and then I met my now wife, and she lived in Florida. I was living in Georgia at the time, and so I moved to Florida, and got married, and I found a therapist down here, and I didn't know what EMDR was at that point. I didn't know anything about it, but I knew that I wanted to continue going to therapy because it was really helping me understand who I am,
Hmm.
and it took, I think, maybe 10 or 15 minutes in my first visit with my second therapist for her to be like, so you have a lot of childhood traumas, and we're going to go through EMDR, and this is going to help you change the emotions that you have tied to those memories so that you're not carrying all this
Wow.
around.
That's
And I was
huge.
like, I don't know what you just said, but I'm in. Like, where do I sign?
Where do
And we
I
did that.
start?
Yeah.
Mm,
But going through, like, we sat down, she had me make a list of like 10 different events as a child that were, you know, traumatic points and things that I felt like were pain points. So, I talked about the firewood stack and the trash can and a variety of things like that. Right.
hmm.
Um, Sorry, the dog woke up from the nap.
It's okay. I
But
don't hear anything.
we got, we got into those memories, and I just like, and this is something I really go into a lot of detail about in the book because I think it's so important that we would go like I would go back to that firewood stack, and I would stand there, current day me, I think I was 44 at the time, but 44-year-old Justin standing beside 8-year-old Justin, while he's standing there counting pieces of firewood sticking out of that stack, and my dad standing on the other side with the paddle ready to give the whipping, and to really immerse myself in the feelings of that moment. Like what was 8-year-old Justin feeling in that moment? And what did 8-year-old Justin believe about himself in that moment? And then what does 44-year-old Justin think is going on here? And what does he believe in this moment? And like just really getting deep into what is actually happening right now beside this firewood stack. Like that was the first time that I ever really understood that none of that was about me. Like that was
Yeah.
my dad working out his shit that he was carrying around, right? Like he's still trying to get the pat on the back from his dad by having the perfect house and everything. Like, but it wasn't. Like everything was a constant disaster. But he was doing everything that he could to get a pat on the back that he was never going to get. And part of that extended on to me. And it's just because I happened to be there, right? It was never about whether I did a good job or a bad job stacking that wood. I did a great job. That's what I realized in that moment is that I stacked wood every day. We always had firewood. The house was never cold. I did great. My dad
Yeah.
didn't do a good job of understanding that or supporting me, but that's on him. That didn't have anything to do with me. Like I was awesome. And when I shifted that belief of who I was and the value that I had at 8 years old, like that changes my whole understanding of who I am and who I've always been. And we did that over and over and over. Like we did that with the trash can. When I go stand beside the trash can with 6-year-old Justin sitting inside there and my mom sitting at the sewing machine out there sewing a dress for the historical reenactment thing, like trying to get the grip, an understanding of what's really happening here. It had nothing to do with my inability to keep my mouth shut or to control myself. It had to do with my mom, like being a bad mom, doesn't understand how to appropriately punish or guide or anything else. Like that's on her. It had nothing to do with me. And I was
Right.
I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And and that like just changing the belief that core understanding that it's not that I'm not good enough. It's not that I don't have any value. It's not that I'm worthless and can be thrown away. Like it has nothing to do with that. Like I'm amazing. My parents were fucked up. And
Seriously.
that was what EMDR did for me.
That is so healing. That is so
Uh,
amazing.
Like it takes away all the shame and like, which is what I was really trying to get away from all of my drinking, like get away from that shame and, or when I got sober, I said, trying to get past that from my drinking, like the shame monster and that feeling of inadequacy. Like EMDR got me away from both of those things. And that's like it's such a profound, it's hard to even put it into words. It's such a profound shift of how you think about yourself, which changes how you deal with other people, how you present yourself, your confidence, like how you everything, how you live, like who
Everything.
you are, changes everything.
Yeah. And just doing like it takes so much courage to do that deep work, but
It
that's what
does.
changes everything.
I think I think being honest with yourself is a crucial part of any kind of success in life, right?
Mm,
But getting sober is no different. Like and I think that understanding that putting all of that stuff out there to someone else, to anyone else, to everyone else, like nothing bad happens. Like when I put sunshine on all my secrets, like I don't know what I thought might happen if someone knew that I was sitting in a trash can. Like
hmm
I couldn't imagine telling the kids at school. Now school kids would be brutal on me, and that's different. But I think as an adult, you just have this unconscious belief that if someone else knows that, like that's the end of the world, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
but it's not. Like none of that
No.
stuff, once you get it outside your head, it doesn't have any power anymore. And
Yeah.
so being able to talk about all of these things and like the way that I feel about myself, the way that I was treated, the way that I've treated other people. I've done bad stuff. I was wildly sexually inappropriate for most of my 20s. I'm not proud of that, but I understand how I got there, and that
Right.
wasn't my
Yeah.
fault. And I think that lacking any tools, that's going to happen 99 times out of 100 when you put all those ingredients in the pot. That's what comes out, right? Like
Exactly.
trauma breeds insecurities, insecurities breed bad behavior. And
Yeah.
you know, I'm proud of the fact that I managed to get through that and come out the other side and do something different. And
Right.
so I don't have shame about my behavior anymore, even though it was deplorable. Like I understand what it is, and that telling people what it is might help change them in a positive way rather than something bad happening to me. So being honest
Yeah.
and truthful is a huge part of this.
Yeah. And I think we have to talk about it to be able to you know, it- like talking about it actually makes it okay for other people to talk about it. And once the discussion is happening, that's when everything starts to shift. And I feel like, the sex and love addiction piece is a very common, like people switch addictions when they first get sober.
Hmm.
And that is something that's very easy to hide um,
Sure.
when you're sober. Like when you're drinking and being inappropriate, like nothing's hidden. Like
Right.
just it's a disaster. And so I have seen that a lot, even in sobriety, because people haven't, done the deep work like you've done to really address like when you're talking about EMDR, that's core work. Like
Absolutely.
that is the thing that propels bad behavior is living with unresolved trauma, right? So you do the hard work and then you don't have to act out in all those other ways as well.
That's
So
right.
then you can start being the person that you want to be.
Well, I think that's the key to long-term sobriety too, is that,
Yeah,
I'm not saying it's impossible for me to relapse, but the odds are much lower because I don't have all of the unresolved traumas inside driving me to try to find some way to change the way that I feel. Like
right.
I don't want to change the way that I feel because I love the way that I feel now. So
Yeah.
I don't have that need hanging over my head anymore. And
Yeah.
that's awesome.
It's almost like that unresolved trauma that we dissociate from. It's like that anchor, hanging around your neck and you don't even know it's there. That can happen in sobriety too.
Sure.
And I think that's why it's important to go deeper in sobriety to address the core wounds. Not everybody does. And I feel like that's oftentimes like what's at the core of relapse when people relapse is they're carrying around this unresolved trauma that they're unaware of.
Right.
It can be
So
really
I think
hard.
before we really understood all of the elements to recovery, we used to call that a dry drunk. And and I think probably a lot of people still do, but that's what it really is. Is it's not that they didn't work through the 12 steps. It's that you got there's so much more to it. I think
Yeah.
that's my big problem with 12-step programs. As much as I love the fact that it got me where I am, like that's like level one, and there's 10 levels, and I think
Yeah.
that they're level one, but they don't tell you that there's more levels than that. You have to figure that out on your own, and that's
Well,
changing. I think sobriety is becoming a much more talked about thing in society. There's options now outside of your traditional 12-step stuff that talk about how psychology is such a big part of that. And I think for me, it's definitely
yeah, but yeah, even in the literature, they say to seek outside help. What I love about 12 step is that it's peer support, but they're not professionals,
right.
right? We need the professionals. We need like a multi-layered approach to this for long-term sobriety. And it is in some of the literature, but I think it's so easy to become dependent on the fellowship, and the fellowship is flawed. To be kind,
Sure, it's
to be
filled with flawed
kind.
people, right?
Yeah, it's not the hotbed of mental health. And I remember one time I don't know why I'm going to tell you the story. I took my son to a 12-step meeting. He was an adult and there was a girl making eyes at him the whole time. And I was like, well, the odds are good, but the goods are odd. So
Yeah,
tread lightly,
yeah.
my friend.
Proceed with caution. Lots and lots of
Proceed with
caution.
lots of, yeah, we never went back to that meeting.
Right, right.
I was like, you will not be going to that meeting. But yeah, no,
Yeah,
I
one of
think
my
it's
things
important.
I like to point out anytime I get the opportunity and it's appropriate in a meeting that one of the most important lines in the big book is on page 164 where it says we only know a little because
Yeah.
I think there were so many. I say so many. There weren't very many old timers in my groups, but the three or four that were there were like, if it's not in between page one and page 164, I don't, or in the big book, then I don't need it, right? And I think that's such a closed-minded perspective that people who don't know better glom onto, like, oh well, he's been sober 35 years. That must be the attitude I need to have. So if it's not in the book, I don't want to know about it.
That's
And
so
and
silly. That
that's
drives me
so
nuts.
dangerous, right?
It's
Like
dangerous.
I
It's
I bought
outright
into that.
dangerous.
I sucked it up just like everybody else when I was new. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the bad things that happens in those meetings is instead of getting a list of resources, you get the one resource, and it's limiting. And I think a lot of people go back out because of that.
Yeah, the funny thing is that like you said, we only know but a little. So there's all kinds of indications that like even in the literature. that they're saying don't rely on the literature.
Right. Yeah. Like they knew. But
And
once it becomes
also
canonized, that this is the
canonized, yeah.
legend, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But oftentimes, what those people are saying, like they're saying they're standing on the literature, but what they're saying is in direct conflict with the literature.
Yeah. Well, the
So
people that do
that's
that are
why,
the ones that never changed, that are saying the
yeah,
same things at year 35 that they were saying at year 2, and that nothing ever changed in their
they
life.
basically just had 1 year they repeated 35 times.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
listen, whatever, maybe that's, better than what they were doing before.
Right.
But
Better them than
yeah.
me.
Yeah, that's one of my things. It's like it's not the people. It's like if you go back to the literature to see what the literature actually says, it's typically in direct conflict with those people. So it's
Yeah.
not the program, the steps are one thing and the fellowship is another. And I definitely divorce the two. It's the people that can be the deciding factor whether it's good or not. Like it sounds like your experience with Roland was life-changing,
Yeah,
right? And he
absolutely.
was he was born out of that, and he sounded like somebody I would be friends with because he was calling people out on their BS. So God bless him.
Right. In front of a group.
Yeah, I love that shit. Now that is true
Me too.
rebellion. That is true
Right.
rebellion, and that's more along in lines with the nature of the official organization rather than the fellowship.
Right. Right.
I'm an advocate,
Well,
obviously, but I know but that's just I'm with you. It's the tip of the iceberg.
right. It
It
really
is
is.
it
There's so
really
much
is
more.
so much more. So
I
much
think
more.
just like the vast array of self awareness and self knowledge that I've gathered since I took things up to the next level,
Yeah.
like it really broadens your perspective on all that stuff. And I know now that, for a long time, drinking and recovery were like my whole world, and now
Hmm.
like it's a piece of it, but it's just one piece out of the whole puzzle that is my life and the whole journey that all of this is, right? Of trying to
Yeah.
become an emotionally healthy human being who has contributing positive things into the world.
Yeah.
There's so much more to resolving all of that stuff.
So much more. So much more. Well, listen, I can't wait to get your audiobook.
I'm gonna have to get to work on that.
Oh, yeah. Um, and to really, I think it'd be so interesting to get like you said, a fly on the wall view of what the process of EMDR, doing that deep trauma therapy work is really like, and to see how amazing your life can be on the other end of that. And you're an amazing example. We're either, what's that saying? We're examples or cautionary tales. You're maybe a little of both.
A little both. Yep.
I'm a little of
Definitely
both too.
more of one than the other now, but it used to be on the other end of that spectrum. So,
Yeah, I am right there with you, homie. We
yep.
are part cautionary tale. Well, where can people find your book?
My website, JBoydLong, has links to all my books, but they're on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the online bookstores. You can find those, but there's direct links. I also have a blog there that's got some self-development stuff in there that people might find interesting. And
Nice.
there's a lot of good stuff in that. So
Yeah.
jboydlong.com.
jboydlong.com. I think your blog, I'm gonna have to check out the blog too. I'm a reader, mostly an Audible consumer, but yeah, I'll have to check that out. Well, listen, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to meet you. And thank you for spending this time with me. I love your story. I think it's going to help so many people, which is kind of why we're in this business, right?
Well, that's right. Just trying to destigmatize and remove a lot of the mystery and shadow from this. So let people see
Yeah,
what it is and how to get there.
I love it. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. It's been a great conversation.
One last thing before you go, if you enjoyed the podcast today, please don't forget to subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher and leave a review. And if you'd like to make a donation to the podcast and help me keep the lights on, you can do so by visiting odatchat.com. There's a donation button or membership button on the right-hand side. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us.